What's going on?
I'm an off-duty officer. I thought it was in my apartment, and I shot a guy thinking it was my apartment.
Welcome back to Enforced, where we cover the most shocking and controversial police body cam footage. Today we're uncovering the baffling truth behind 8 cases where corrupt cops got karma in court. For our first clip, we take you to District Court of Oklahoma County, where police officer Daniel Holtzclaw is about to face justice for the heinous crimes he has committed.
All right, the verdict seemed to be in proper order. This is in the District Court of Oklahoma County, State of Oklahoma, the State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery. We, the jury, impaneled and sworn in the above entitled cause, do upon our oaths find as follows. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and set punishment at 8 years. Count 2, procuring lewd exhibition. Not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Count 3.
After a grueling trial, former Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw has been found guilty of multiple charges, including sexual battery, procuring lewd exhibition, and forcible oral sodomy. The verdict sends shockwaves through the community as Holtzclaw is sentenced to a staggering 263 years in prison for his heinous crimes. Holtzclaw's victims, 8 brave women, including a grandmother in her 50s and a 17-year-old, have come forward to share their harrowing experiences. The majority of these women were African American and lived in a low-income neighborhood that Holtzclaw patrolled. These courageous women faced their fears and spoke out against the man who violated them, and their voices were heard. Local news reporters commented on the significance of the decision, stating that it sends a powerful message that police officers are not above the law. However, there is still much work to be done, as there is a lack of statistics about violence conducted by police officers on the job. The Oklahoma County District Attorney stated that the outcome of this case shows that they will pursue investigations regardless of whether it's police officers, regardless of race, or the background of the victims. But one thing is for sure. This police officer thought he was above the law and his crimes will go unpunished, but karma got to him quicker than he anticipated. Next, we take you to Dallas-Fort Worth, where the jury is sitting in silence while trying to understand how a police officer murdered her innocent black neighbor who was staying peacefully in his own home. This appalling crime was judged in the murder trial of former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger, who shot and killed her black neighbor, Botham John. Jurors were shown graphic new body cam footage from the scene. The video captured the chaotic moments after Geiger killed John in his own home, claiming she mistakenly thought he was in her apartment. The testimony revealed that Geiger did not have drugs or alcohol in her system at the time of the shooting. The footage showed Geiger appearing frantic as first responding officers began CPR on John for 7 minutes. As John was being wheeled out of the building, surveillance video showed Geiger being comforted by fellow officers. John's neighbor, Joshua Brown, became emotional talking about what it was like living across from Jean. During her trial, Amber was visually traumatized and said that she thought she had entered her own apartment, and upon seeing an unknown person in her room, she opened fire.
How do you feel what you did, Mr. John?
I feel like a terrible person. I feel like a piece of crap. I hate that I have to live with this every single day of my life. And I ask God for forgiveness, and I hate myself every single day. I feel like I don't deserve the chance to be with my family and friends. I wish he was the one with the gun that killed me. I never wanted to take an innocent person's life. I am so sorry.
But the jury did not buy her arguments. They found her guilty of murder and took less than 24 hours to deem the accident as intentional police brutality.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Amber Geiger, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. No outbursts.
Geiger soon appealed for a retrial, but Texas's highest court upheld her murder conviction. Our next victim of karma is Eric DeValconaire, a Kansas City police detective who has been found guilty of manslaughter in the 2019 killing of a black man who was fatally shot in his own backyard. The decision, announced by Jackson County Circuit Court Judge J. Dale Youngs, marks a stunning victory for justice. Eric DeValconaire, 43, was charged with first-degree involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action in the December 3, 2019 shooting of Cameron Lamb. Here is the judge presenting the highly sought-after judgment.
The court is further compelled to find beyond a reasonable doubt that when defendant shot and killed Cameron Lamb, number 1, defendant was not acting in lawful self-defense. Number 2, defendant was not acting in lawful defense of Sergeant Schwam. And 3, it being conceded that defendant and Sergeant Schwam were not effecting an arrest of Cameron Lamb or preventing his escape after an arrest, that defendant did not lawfully utilize deadly force as a law enforcement officer under Missouri use of force laws applicable to such officers.
The judge explains his reasoning for the verdict, saying that he is compelled by the evidence to find that DeValconaire was not acting in self-defense or in defense of his partner, Sergeant Schwam, when he shot and killed Lamb. He also says that DeValconaire and Schwam were not lawfully on the property and that they escalated a situation that had already de-escalated. The judge remarked that DeValconaire's conduct was a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would exercise in the situation, and that it constituted criminal negligence.
The court finds the defendant guilty of the lesser included offense of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, a Class E felony. As to count 2, the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, the court finds the defendant guilty.
The judge found DeValconaire guilty of both charges, but reduced the involuntary manslaughter charge to second-degree involuntary manslaughter, a lesser offense that occurs when someone causes death by acting with criminal negligence, which means failing to be aware of or consider the risks of their actions. It is a Class E felony punishable by up to 4 years in prison and a fine of up to $5,000. The verdict has sparked mixed reactions from the public, some praising the judge for holding DeValconaire accountable for his actions, and others criticizing him for being too lenient or biased. The case has also raised questions about police accountability, racial justice, and use of force laws in Missouri and across the nation. As a police officer, you have the power to uphold the law and bring criminals to justice. However, this does not give you the right to take the law into your own hands and act as judge, jury, and executioner. Some officers may overstep their bounds and face consequences of their actions, but it's important to remember that justice must always be served within the confines of the law. Next up, we have a former St. Clair Shores police officer, Michael Natariano, who was sentenced to 6 months in jail for a violent confrontation with a group of Detroit men who stole his daughter's cell phone. The judge delivered a strong message along with a stiff sentence. Natariano was up against one misdemeanor charge at Frank Murphy Hall of Justice after a jury found him not guilty of 10 other charges, including armed robbery and racial intimidation. He thought that he would get probation, but that's not what the judge had in mind. This is despite a seemingly heartfelt apology from Natariano.
No winners at all in this situation, not only for myself and my family, but for all of those involved.
Natariano, a father, husband, and 20-year police veteran, will spend 6 months in the Wayne County Jail. Judge Kenny set an example after 18 months of probation was the prosecutor's recommendation.
That it be a deterrent to others who might think to act in that way.
A few months prior to this crime, a jury found Natariano guilty of willful neglect of duty by a police official after he and a Detroit police sergeant pointed a gun at 2 men and called them both the N-word at a Citgo gas station in Detroit in July of 2013. Photos show the officers both off duty at the time. The men they confronted allegedly stole Natariano's 16-year-old daughter's cell phone. Only the misdemeanor charge stuck. His attorney said his client's actions nearly 3 years ago were out of character, stating he is not the same man he was on July 21, 2013. But when the prosecutors say racial slurs were used during the confrontation, Judge Kenny sentenced him to more than probation. The officer has been fired. John Romer, a former Fort Worth police officer, was found guilty in 2019 for making false statements to the grand jury about a 2016 confrontation when he punched a man in a hospital lobby. Today, he received his sentence, 5 years in prison.
It is therefore the order, judgment, and decree of this court that the defendant, John Preston Romer Jr., is hereby sentenced to 5 years confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
The case against John Romer culminated today in court. Handcuffed and in custody more than 4 years after a hospital lobby encounter was captured by surveillance cameras, Romer was convicted of lying under oath about what happened that day. There couldn't have been a more severe aggravated perjury, said the prosecutor, all the lies that he told to cover up his excessive force. Romer was working an off-duty detail when he punched and body-slammed 20-year-old Henry Newsom. Prosecutors revisited the case before the judge announced Romer's punishment for perjury. Newsom had borrowed a bystander's cell phone to call for a ride. The confrontation with Romer escalated, and Newsom was taken into custody. Romer told the grand jury he placed Newsom under arrest before punching him. However, the conversation recorded by surveillance proved he had not told the truth. Charges against Newsom of trespassing and resisting arrest were later dropped. Romer's attorney argued for probation and called the perjury case bogus.
It's a case that has no bones. It's a case that has no substance. It's a case that has no materiality. The statement, "you're under arrest," is not material to anything that was litigated in this courtroom. It's a complete jellyfish of a case.
But the judge decided that 5 years behind bars is appropriate. The prosecutor also celebrated the judge's verdict.
As a police officer, we fairly expect as citizens for you to be a person that upholds the law. And when you fall into making false statements, using excessive force against citizens, then it's our duty to call you out on that and to act appropriately.
Romer could have faced as many as 10 years in prison. It is not clear if the state will pursue pending charges of official oppression. But one thing is for sure, he got what he deserved. On to Inkster, Michigan now, where William Melendez, an Inkster police officer, is about to be convicted in the beating of black motorist Floyd Dent.
You utilized your dirty, hairy tactics and used excessive force to arrest him. You betrayed your city. You caused your lovely wife heartache. And you caused Mr. Dent severe anguish.
Melendez, who didn't testify during the trial, spoke to the judge before she handed down her sentence.
To Mr. Dent and his family, I am truly sorry.
Melendez spoke to the court just moments before he learned his fate for the beating of Floyd Dent. Melendez, who was a police officer in the city of Inkster, was convicted largely on that dashcam video.
Many who proactively patrol the streets in cities with high crime, violence, low income, and poverty, emotionally, it becomes a part of you.
Melendez did not show any emotion when Judge Evans sentenced him to prison for 13 months to no more than 10 years. The victim, Floyd Dent, was also at peace knowing that the monster who caused him pain and anguish is going to be behind bars for a long time.
The things he done, I felt kind of bad, when he spoke. So, I think it was pretty reasonable.
Do you forgive him?
Yes, I've been forgiven. Like I said, any man with a family, shouldn't be away from a family at all, especially in prison.
Even Melendez's attorney says the judge could have been tougher on him, but of course, they are appealing that conviction. Floyd Dent's attorney confirmed the $1 million payout just 2 days after the civil lawsuit was filed. They had been negotiating for weeks, even though he filed the suit just a few days ago. The settlement figure of $1.4 million was reached with the help of a retired judge, and the city of Inkster will pay it out over several months. For our next case, we take you to Tarrant County, Texas, where a police officer is about to suffer the consequences of his crimes. Aaron Dean was charged with the murder of a Tatiana Jefferson, who was a 28-year-old pre-medical graduate student at Xavier University of Louisiana. She graduated from the university in 2014 with a degree in biology and worked in pharmaceutical equipment sales. Miss Jefferson was black, while Dean, who was white, pleaded not guilty to murder. Prosecutors had asked the jury to sentence Dean to the maximum 20 years in prison for his manslaughter conviction, adding that anything less was a travesty of justice. Miss Jefferson had been playing video games with her 8-year-old nephew before she went to investigate a noise outside her window, carrying a handgun that she owned. It was around 2:30 a.m. on October 12, 2019. Miss Jefferson and her nephew had burned some hamburgers while cooking and opened the doors to ventilate the home. Seeing the doors open late at night, a concerned neighbor called the police. Body cam footage released by the Fort Worth Police Department shows Dean shouting at Miss Jefferson to put her hands up before immediately firing through the glass. Dean said that he shot Miss Jefferson because he saw a gun in her hand. According to reports, she retrieved her gun and approached the window to investigate a noise outside her window. Police found a handgun near Jefferson's body, which according to her 8-year-old nephew, she was pointing toward the window before being shot. Tatiana Jefferson lawfully owned the gun and had a concealed carry license. A point of contention during the trial was whether Dean saw the gun in Miss Jefferson's hand before pulling the trigger. Prosecutors argued there was no evidence of this, but Dean's lawyers said he fired in self-defense. As a police officer, Aaron Dean should have followed proper procedures and protocols when responding to the call for a welfare check at Tatiana Jefferson's home. This would have included announcing himself as a police officer, identifying himself to the occupants of the home, and attempting to communicate with them before taking any further action. He should have also followed the department's policies on use of force and de-escalation. During his trial, Dean admitted that his actions constituted bad police work. Dean, who resigned from the police before his arrest, showed no emotion as his verdict and sentence were read.
Good afternoon. The jury has sent a note or given me notice that they have reached a verdict. Are both sides ready to receive the verdict?
State's ready, Your Honor. The defense is ready, Judge.
All right. Y'all did fabulous when we did the guilt-innocence verdict, okay? Same rules apply. I don't know what this verdict is. Can't have any emotions, all right? Let's bring them in. Good afternoon. Juror number one, it's my understanding the jury has reached a verdict. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is it a unanimous verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. If you hand it, please, Deputy Nicholson. Mr. Dean. Verdict reads, we the jury, having found the defendant Aaron York Dean guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of manslaughter, assess his punishment at confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 11 years, 10 months, 12 days. They do not assess a fine.
In a powerful statement, prosecuting lawyer Sharon Wilson acknowledged that while the verdict and sentence won't bring Tatiana Jefferson back, it's important to hold those who break the law accountable. Wilson emphasized that the trial wasn't about politics or race, but about justice for Tatiana Jefferson. The now former U.S. police officer Aaron Dean has been sentenced to nearly 12 years in prison after being convicted of manslaughter for shooting a woman in her bedroom. The jury found Dean guilty on December 15th of fatally shooting 28-year-old Tatiana Jefferson in her home in Fort Worth, Texas in 2019. For our last case for today's episode, we head to Orlando, where Judge Robert Egan has sentenced this police officer to a year in jail for using excessive force.
I understand why the jury made the decision they did. It's clear to me why they did. I was wrong, and I caused your injury, sir. And I am deeply sorry that I did, and that you had to suffer through that.
Peter DeLeo was a former Orlando police officer when he was sentenced to nearly a year in county jail after he was captured on video kneeing a handcuffed man so hard that it ruptured his spleen. At the end of an emotional hearing, Peter DeLeo, 32, was led in handcuffs from the courtroom. He was convicted by an Orange County jury on September 14th of felony battery. Jurors concluded that DeLeo broke the law on August 12, 2014, when he stepped into a holding cell at OPD Bicycle Patrol Office downtown and kneeled Lisa in the midsection. Lisa had been banging his head against the cell door and broken its window, and DeLeo told supervisors that he went in to try to stop it and keep Lisa from injuring himself. At trial, defense attorney David Bigney argued that Lisa's injuries happened earlier and thus DeLeo was not guilty of causing him great bodily harm. Jurors rejected that claim. The victim of his brutality, Lisa, 42 of Titusville, said nothing during DeLeo's emotional apology and only nodded. He is now homeless, jobless, and living in a tent, he said later. Circuit Judge Robert Egan could have placed DeLeo on probation, something his lawyer requested, but the judge said the 8-year department veteran had betrayed the public trust. He ordered DeLeo to serve 51 weeks in the Orange County Jail and placed him on 2 years of probation. The judge said he would rule later on Lisey's request that DeLeo pay $61,000 in medical bills. He'll also have to attend anger management class and pay restitution. The police officer thought no one would bat an eye if he were to assault a prisoner, but got karma within a few months.